Hi! Welcome to this part of my guide and review featuring the Solo Adventuring Toolkit. If you haven't seen the other parts of my guide and review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to talk about performing a clue discovery, and we are also going to start talking about dynamic plots, determining the plot structure and such. As always, I am going to be reading a few key paragraphs to you, and I'm going to give you my opinion on those paragraphs. Let's talk about performing a clue discovery first. Once you've established which of the environments apply to the circumstances of your clue search, you can now actually search for clues. You make a perception or other kind of searching check as you normally would, depending on your system. If you fail, you merely waste time and incur the normal risks and penalties associated with doing so in the environment you are searching. This may trigger a roll on any applicable wandering monster encounter table, for example. If you are successful in your check, then you may discover a clue. You roll on the clue finding by environment table, referencing the environment which applies along the top columns and using the context column on the left which applies as well. If you have a chance of discovering a clue by accident, you roll directly on the clue finding by environment table. Now I think there are two ways to handle this. You could roll beforehand to see if there is some clue in the environment, and then you make your check using your system. But it could be the other way around. You could make your check, and it turns out that you have a chance of finding a clue if you're successful in that particular check, and then you make your roll on the table. It's all up to you. Or if you want to handle things a bit faster, you could discard one method or the other. It all depends. Now, when it comes to clues and the role of imagination, clues as handled in these subsystems within the Solo Adventuring Toolkit present pieces of information that are basically abstract incremental counters. So what does finding a clue mean in real life? What does not finding a clue mean? This is left largely up to you in your role as both the game master or dungeon master and as a player. But some examples could help, and you have plenty of examples here. Finding a clue should be a piece of information relevant to the quest you are working on. If it's an investigation, a clue is typically evidence. And if you are searching for a particular missing item, it might be some sort of piece of data or some other object or traces that point out to that item. Maybe it's a receipt indicating that the item was sold, or maybe you find some sort of ticket or some sort of voucher indicating that transport was paid for. So receipts, letters, and other paper trails could serve as clues to point you in the right direction. When it comes to searching and failing to find a clue in a location can mean many different things beyond what you might be inclined to initially interpret. The failure might mean that you simply didn't look hard enough or didn't have time to do so without being noticed. It could mean that the culprit of a crime simply did a good job of covering her tracks or burning evidence that might otherwise have incriminated her. It could also mean that the entire location you are searching turns out to be irrelevant to the quest you are pursuing. So it all depends on the context, on the system. The exact interpretation is left to you, to your imagination, and the quest and story you are building. So many crime or mystery-based role-playing games, they have this race against time sort of flow, where you are facing off against a criminal mastermind, and if you perhaps fail to notice this clue or take too long during a part of the investigation, the criminal commits some other type of crime or felony, or he puts into motion some part of his genius master plan. So it's up to you to deal with the consequences and the failures. But in the Solo Adventuring Toolkit, you also have a failing to discover clue table. So if you failed a check, you make a roll in this table and different things could happen. Maybe you have insufficient skill or time to locate the clue. So perhaps you want to come back when you have leveled up, or perhaps when you are not too much in a hurry. Maybe you obtain the result of suspect destroy the evidence. Maybe you find some pieces of paper that something was burned in the fireplace or the furnace. Or perhaps the location or environment actually is not related to the quest. So you have different results. This is a very handy table in page 131. Remember that one. When you fail your checks, reference this table. Now let's move on to plot-based solo adventuring. that is determining the plot structure. Much of solo adventuring will be resolving combats using the rules mechanics of the system of your choice. For many books that attempt to spell out an approach to solo play, the adventure begins and ends with that concept. But the Solo Adventuring Toolkit provides you with the tables, the resources, the theory to unify or combine combat, exploration, and treasure finding to create a story that organically unfolds with the results of your checks, of your decisions, your choices, the tables, all of that. Now, throughout the Solo Adventuring Toolkit, there are places where you have the opportunity of either selecting something intentionally from a table or letting the dice result of a specific table dictate a particular development or outcome. Sometimes you may not be able to decide if you want to determine things randomly or just choosing what you want, what you think is appropriate for the context. So you have a table here to determine that. So you make a roll and maybe you need to pick a result. Maybe you have to randomly determine the result, or maybe you need to alternate from the prior choices. So for example, maybe during a quest, you decided that a specific result within a table is appropriate. You don't roll for that, you just use that result. And later on, you find a situation where you can't decide if you want to pick something or just roll the dice and let them tell that section of the story. So now you make your roll, you obtain the alternate from prior result. So because you picked the other result, now it's the turn to randomly determine things. The Solo Adventuring Toolkit contains materials to determine the plots, to generate them, and to resolve the situation, of course. But there is an entire FlexTale Encounter Generator book dedicated to generating dynamic plots, so that sounds quite interesting. I hope it will come out soon. Moving on, when you want to generate a solo plot in the Solo Adventuring Toolkit, you have the following sequence. First, you determine the plot structure. Then you define the targets. You identify milestones. You discover clues. You resolve events, and you conclude the plot. Each of these steps is discussed later on in this Solo Adventuring Toolkit. Let's talk about determining the plot structure first. There are thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of adventure modules and stories that have been created in support of tabletop role-playing games across the many decades that they've existed. There are hundreds, thousands even, of different games themselves. This book recognizes that there is an enormous amount of diversity in the wealth of products that have been published, and that the boundaries of what is possible to imagine are being pushed every single day by publishers and authors, both big and small. So to condense that wealth of myriad of options into a concise list, it's always going to be an exercise in futility to try to cover it all. But if you consider a given quest a concise, specific set of objectives and the path that your adventuring party undertakes to reach those goals, you can imagine and make sense of pretty much any tool that you can use, any tool that is found in the Solo Adventuring Toolkit or beyond. More than anything, the structure of a plot or story gives us a framework to build out of. Each category has its own section in this book with tools and description and inspiration specific to that structure of story. This book will define those categories and lay out what is involved in creating a solo adventure plot based in each of those structures. Let's talk about the types of plot structures first. There are 9 different structures of story. They are broad categories. They are chase, that is, when you need to follow someone or something as it moves. There is slay, pretty self-explanatory, that is destroy, kill, etc. There is deliver, that is, taking something and moving it elsewhere. There is obtain, going somewhere and gathering one or more things. There is stop, preventing something from happening. There is abstract mystery, discovering clues towards the revelation of a conclusion. We have explore, making discoveries about where things are. There is interaction, talking with one or more people about something. And there is complex, 2 or more of the above structures linked together. The objectives or central foci of these sort of plot structures can be anything. It could be people, creatures, items, factions, nations, locations, logistics, information, geography, spells, dimensions, etc. It could be any noun. Basically, anything at all that makes sense in the context of your game world or the story as needed. You can randomly determine any of these plot structures using a table, or just choose the one that you like for the role-playing game or the setting that you are playing in. So for example, if you want to kill a powerful monster, just pick Slay. Or maybe you obtain Stop as a random result. Perhaps you need to stop an apocalyptic device from activating. Perhaps you obtain the result of Chase. You need to reach a particular non-player character before that non-player character enters a zone or an area. Maybe that is a non-player character that you need to capture, or maybe that non-player character is an ally and he or she is walking into a trap. Maybe you obtain the result of Explore, and then you immediately go to the quick start section of this solo adventuring toolkit, the dungeon generator section, and you start to create this site of the place that you are exploring, so it's all up to you. And this concludes this part of the guide and review. I think these tables are going to be highly useful, and the theory and the structure of what to do with clues, when to find clues, that is determined by your tables or your checks using your particular system, or if you want to use some random results, for example the failure interpretation table. If you failed your check, make a roll and the story is going to fail forward, so to speak. Or if you are handling things a bit more gritty, maybe someone dies or something is stolen, some place is ruined depending on your failure. And the table to determine the plot structure is also going to be very handy if you have some analysis paralysis when getting started with your solo RPG campaign. Just make a roll in this random plot structure table to determine if it's going to be a chase or a stop mission or an abstract mystery, a delivery quest, something like that. It doesn't mean that the entire adventure or even the entire campaign is going to follow that same plot structure. It's just a structure to get the ball rolling. Many things could deviate from that or branch out in perhaps many different plot structures later on in the adventure or the campaign. Thank you for watching this part of the guide and review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.